My name is Riley Young. I will be your host today, and we are really happy to have you all here. It's great to see everyone saying hello in the chat. Please do let us know where you're tuning in from, and we have a really great panel of guests today. Before we get started and talking to them all, I do have a few admin items we need to discuss first, the normal webinar admin sort of stuff. So let's jump straight into that. First of all, as usual, we are recording this webinar and we will share it after the event. So expect an email, especially also those who have registered but aren't attending, they will also receive a recording of this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a Q&A section. So if you're at panel on the right-hand side, there is a Q&A tab right next to the general section in the chat. So feel free to add your questions throughout the webinar. We will dedicate a bit of time at the end of this call to go through those questions. So please do feel free to ask away there. We may even have some being answered in the chat as we go as well. How we are going to do today's webinar is like this. We'll do some basic introductions of the panel, and then we're going to dive into how we did the survey. So looking a little bit of what makes up the survey and the responses there. We are going to take a look at the top metrics and the benchmarks for those metrics. Now, we won't be going into the entire benchmark report. We do not have enough time to cover everything. So we will best be focusing on some key aspects. So just a reminder to do actually download the benchmark report if you have not already, as there is a lot more to the benchmark report than what we will be showing today. We're going to then spend a bit of time commenting on the key trends that we have found with the report, and that's where we'll have our panel of guests speak also about the challenges and things they're planning for in 2023, and followed up at the end with a Q&A session. So please do ask your questions throughout this webinar, and let's get things started. So first of all, some introductions. My name is Riley. I am the education content specialist at Klaus. I'm actually replacing Lizzie from Support Driven today. She was meant to host, but unfortunately has fallen ill. So that's why you are seeing me on the screen instead of Lizzie. I'm joined today by the VP of Customer Support at Intercom, Declan Ivory, the Director of Global Frontline Support at Aircall, Macrina Sheridan, and the co-founder and CEO of Klaus, Martin Goiver. We will get to our panelists a little later on, but first we're actually going to take a quick look at a little bit of what makes up this 2023 benchmark survey. So we first just want to give you a bit of sense of the survey itself. So some of you may know on this call, this is actually our third iteration of the benchmark report. We started this back in 2021. So this is our third year, and it's also our best year ever as far as the quantity of responses, as well as the variety of responses that we received. So it's a really packed report this year with a lot of great insights. Just to see a bit of the makeup of the industries that responded to the survey. There's no real surprises that consumer services and computer electronics or IT is kind of at the top of the list. But what's really interesting is just the variety of industries we've had respond to this. So everything from B2B to SaaS to nonprofits, pharmaceuticals to real estate, you name it. We've got some input from all of these industries. So a really interesting input here. So we're going to take a little bit of time now and actually cover the top customer service metrics and 2023 benchmarks. So how we've done this is we take all of the data that we retrieved from the survey itself and we distill it down into some key takeaways. So we're going to go through just a few of them right now, and this is just scratching the surface. So as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to download the report and dive in to get even more information than what we'll be showing today. For now, we're going to touch on a few of the key themes from the report, and we'll talk our way through those. Perhaps unsurprisingly to most, the most commonly tracked metrics are the customer-defined ones. So that is CSAT, or customer satisfaction, and customer dissatisfaction as well. Additionally, these are also the two most likely to be labeled as the most important metrics to track by customer service teams. There's a few other cool, interesting bits we see here as well. Is actually a new addition to our tracked metrics, and that is the bot resolution rate. So this kind of highlights the rapid adoption of automation by support teams during the pandemic era. And an also interesting thing to note is this is all pre the GPT era of AI and bots. So this is before this latest boom in regards to AI. So we can really see a trend here of the move to automation and bot implementation as a response to the pandemic. And it's really interesting to see how bot resolution rate has jumped up the charts as far as our tracked metrics go, with 22.1%. So this will be a very interesting metric to track for next year's report also, particularly with the advancement with AI and the bots that are on the market. So it'll be a really interesting one to follow up in the years to come. So CSAT, it's been around forever and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. This one is considered to be the most important support KPI for 23% of the companies surveyed here. Now, what is interesting about CSAT is that it is seen as one of the most important metrics. It's tracked by the most amount of companies, but quite an interesting fact is that we don't actually receive a very high response rate to our CSAT surveys that we send out. We notice that chat obviously has 4 times the response rate as the other means, which makes sense due to being in the moment, being live with the customer in the chat. They are able to respond to the CSAT survey as soon as you're finished. So it's no real surprise if the response rates are higher, but it's still relatively low altogether. So something that can be maybe brought to the panel to discuss here is, are there ways that our customers or our companies can increase the response rate for CSAT? And if not, is there any other way they can infer customer satisfaction from the customers without explicitly receiving a CSAT response? So I'd like to open this one up. Perhaps Macrina or Declan or Martin, either of any of you, if you want to comment on that. How can we A, drive higher CSAT response rates, and B, how can we infer satisfaction without getting it from the customer directly?
I'm happy to take that one, Riley. I think in terms of increasing CSAT, it's obviously trying to make sure that the survey experience is as frictionless as possible. Very easy for the customer to respond in the moment and give their feedback, and also that they have the option maybe to go beyond the initial response, which is clearly what you want to get, but you'd like to be able to get more detail, so give them the option to provide more detail. And I think it's important that you follow up on that in some way and acknowledge that the customer has actually reached out and spent time to give you the feedback. So I think that helps customers trust that you're actually taking the data seriously and will increase your participation over time. But even if you drive it higher, this challenge, it's only a proportion of your total customer base and your customer interactions. And how do you then determine, well, what's the overall customer experience? And that's why being able to infer CSAT in some way is kind of, and there are technologies and ways that you can do today, even very simply generating a sentiment score for a conversation or a case, and using that sentiment score to infer CSAT. There tends to be very good correlation between sentiment score and CSAT. And again, with technology, there's nothing to stop you generating a sentiment score for 100% of your conversations or cases. And then you're getting far more valuable insight into the overall customer experience.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Declan. That's very, very insightful. Anyone else have any comments there, or we'll move forward?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there are some clever little tricks that you can do to increase the CSAT response rate without using any technology at all. Like, for example, pointing out in your messaging that this feedback is actually read by actual people. Many customers disregard those surveys because they think that it's just going into a black hole somewhere. So there are clever little tricks to influence user behavior like that. But of course, what Declan said is absolutely true, and like, you're not going to get to 100% developing this thing called auto QA, where we analyze the AI analyzes the entire customer support volume, but getting the CSAT from the actual customer will remain extremely important, because at the end of the day, they are paying your salary, and trying to get more out of them. I think whatever way you can using technology or other tricks is a good idea.
I was going to also add that I think incentivization for customers, usually those who feel most incentivized are those who had a really incredible experience or those who had a really awful experience. And so you never get to know how the average customer might feel. They might have had a mediocre experience. It was fine. It was nothing awful, but they didn't really feel like it was this exemplary, memorable experience. And I think finding ways to incentivize those customers to respond, Martin, that's a really good idea, letting them know there's actually a person who's responding and reviewing. But also we have our agents solicit feedback as well directly in their responses as they're closing up an interaction, saying, we're always looking to improve. Your feedback's really important, no matter how you feel, and we'd love if you'd submit it. And I think sometimes receiving that personalized message versus a bot does make a difference. People feel more connected and almost feel more like responsible to respond. They feel more incentivized to do it too.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you, panelists, for your input. Very invaluable.
There was one question in the Q&A around how would you go about determining sentiment score. So I'm just can answer that in real time. There are kind of natural language processing tools that you can use that will generate a sentiment score for a conversation, and they're quite mature technologies at this point. And I say there tends to be very good correlation between the sentiment that you determine in a conversation or case versus the actual customer CSAT. So it's very doable using NLP tools.
Absolutely. It's actually something that Klaus has already developed. We have a sentiment analysis that tracks 100% of the conversations there. So there is definitely ways to measure this, which already exist. All right. For closely following CSAT in the most tracked metric is internal quality score, or IQS. So IQS is the metric that represents how well your support team is performing against your own defined internal standards, as opposed to CSAT, which is defined by the customer's point of view. So this is calculated generally through conversation reviews, and the score is based on each support team's personalized scorecard. So it's really looking at quality from your own internal point of view. And it's very much a match made in heaven looking at IQS with CSAT together. It really helps paint a fuller story than just CSAT or just IQS. So what we've seen is that 86% of the smaller teams and even 92% of teams with over 50 agents have already a dedicated quality professional in their ranks. This definitely indicates that there is a growing need for better quality management in the support industry, and that's even summed up by the 50% of the companies who do not have a dedicated quality specialist is actually looking to hire one during 2023. So we are seeing the trend to go up when it comes to quality management. And I would actually like to hear your thoughts on this, Martin, particularly around when you're looking at the tools used for conversation reviews. And we see spreadsheets are still up there, quite highly ranked. Where do you see this going in the future with more and more teams and companies looking to implement quality processes and hire quality professionals?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this every year. It really depends on the size and sophistication, or let's say complexity of your setup. So if you're a small team, you definitely don't need, if we're talking like a couple of support agents, you really don't need a tool. I customer support myself, and in the very early days, it's more about doing anything at all. So I think it's totally fine to have, maybe it's in the form of a meeting or just ad hoc or in spreadsheets, but as you grow and the level of in your setup grows, then it becomes more and more painful to go without a dedicated tool. But it's not completely black and white in that regard. It is certainly clear that the bigger you are, the more likely it is that you can will gain from using some kind of a dedicated tool. But I don't want to make this about plugging Klaus only. Like, we also started that process. Felt like reinventing the wheel in many ways. I think that's okay. It was a meeting where we were just like picking examples. I would say the most important thing is that there's a mindset within the team that only getting CSAT responses is not going to give us the full picture. Only you within your team actually know what your internal standards are. So the analogy that I like to bring is that at CSAT is a little bit like assessing the doctor based on the patient's opinion. So the patient can know certain things, but not necessarily whether the medical procedure was correct. So whatever form this takes, I would say is the right form if it works for you.
That's great.
Yeah, I agree. This is really about holding yourself accountable to a very high bar for the standard of support that you deliver. And as Martin has said, it depends on scale and complexity as to what kind of tool or system you need. But it is really around ensuring that you're holding yourself to a very high bar and making sure that you're understanding where you're not meeting the bar and how you need to improve. And I think there's a lot of evolution happening in the quality assurance area, which we'll touch on later when we talk about challenges.
Yeah, I think it's Declan, also what you've pointed out in conversations, that important to recognize that the vast majority of, unless you have processes in place, the vast majority of conversations will go unchecked. So that's something to keep in mind, that it certainly was the thing that kept me up at night when I thinking like it can't possibly be all perfect, and it wasn't.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I mean, my aspiration is that we should be able to quality assure 100% of conversations or cases. That's where I'd like to be. Yeah.
To tack on to what you guys mentioned, I think the more information you have, the more you're able to collect, the better decision-making power you have. So what processes should be changed internally? Are there trainings or enablements that our teams need? If you're only reviewing a subset of your interactions, then you're not really going forward with full information. And so the more we can review, the better decisions we can make.
Absolutely. Yeah, the more data fueled these decisions are, then the better outcome we'll have for sure. That's great. So we're going to move to our next key metric that is tracked, and this one is first contact resolution rate. Now, this 70% is the benchmark score we've seen across all industries that we surveyed, and we believe that there are some interesting implications here for AI, in particular with the usage of bots now. One thing to ponder with this is, will we actually see first contact resolution rate continue to increase with the introduction of AI and bots, or will we even actually likely see it come down in the next years to come? And it coming down actually could indicate a good thing. It could mean that the humans are actually handling now the more complex conversations that the bots can't, and so therefore they are a lot more complex to solve and maybe can't be achieved in the first contact. So we may see a correlation within time that first contact resolution rate may actually drop, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, that's first contact resolution rate. I will actually talk about this once more on the next slide, and I'll bring this to the panel as well, just because I think it is quite an interesting metric that is now gaining a lot of traction. So we're going to compare those top three tracked metrics now year over year, and we do see that since 2021 to 2022, we had the biggest gains, and that was mainly due to the initial investment that many companies made in improving their support operations, particularly to drive retention during the pandemic. That trend has slowed from 2022 to 2023, and with the exception of first contact resolution rate. That one has actually increased, which we could also see correlated to the addition of a lot of bots and AI being used with support teams in the past year. So with this increase in first contact resolution rate, I am wanting to ask the panel here, is this a direct payoff from the investment support teams have made in the past few years? And where do we see this metric going, in particularly around the idea of how do we track first contact resolution when there's a bot and a human involved and it's in the same interaction? Will we actually see maybe the introduction of first human contact resolution separated from first bot resolution rate? I'd really like to hear from the panel here where they think this may go in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to look at this chart because it's really hard to know whether first contact rate is correlated to the other two metrics. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but I think what we're going to find in the next year or two is we'll talk about this a bit more. What is the happy medium between automation and human interaction? And I have to, I think what I would assume or infer, what questions come up for me looking at this chart is, are we moving too fast with automation and leaning too heavily on it? And are we overcorrecting a bit and being a little overly ambitious? And I think we'll find out, time will tell, but it's really easy to look at this and say, oh, there's a direct correlation between the two.
Yeah, I certainly believe that the increase is probably down to more use of bot and automation, but I think there is an important point here. Like, is it actually delivering the best customer experience? Because we think a lot about the customer experience when a human is involved. I think we take for granted that if we're using automation to deflect or resolve a case or a conversation, that it must be a good experience. And yet, do we really know? Can we really tell that it is the best experience possible? So you really got to think quite thoughtfully around and carefully around how you architect that interaction and how you actually build the conversation over time, and that there's a seamless handover if you need to engage a human in the conversation. I think it's an interesting point you asked, Riley. Like, over time, will we see this first contact resolution break into kind of the automated first contact resolution versus the human first contact resolution? And not sure what the answer to that is, but I think definitely as we kind of begin to use automation and AI a lot more, if we have to think about the metrics and are we actually looking at the metrics in the right way?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And I think it's something that has started to come up more and more in conversations with bigger companies as well, because that was never really a topic. Now it feels like every week there is somebody asking very seriously, like, how can we QA the bot or automated conversations? Because not only is the attention there, but the volume is also there for some very large companies now that the setups are becoming quite advanced.
And I think also, the question might have been answered just as well as a human might from a bot, but there's a level of empathy. A lot of support is really empathy, right? And so how can you test to see how much value that has, how much that human interaction has on the ability to solve the problem? We might be giving the same exact information that a bot might, but it can change the customer sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's going to be a very interesting one to keep track of in the years to come, particularly the use of AI and bots and the customer satisfaction response to that as well. It's definitely one to monitor. Is the implementation of the automations actually beneficial for the customer, which is really what we're looking to achieve at the end of the day. So yeah, very interesting point to look at. So up next, we're going to actually dive into some key takeaways now. So these are just some handpicked kind of key takeaways we've got. Obviously, there is a lot more to the report, as mentioned before. And the first one we will look at is the pain points that teams experience and how that kind of changes as they grow, as you scale. So one thing that has become very clear over the last 3 years, we've done the survey, is that essentially all support teams face the same challenges. It's the same problems exist. However, the priority of the problems does change as the team size increases. So we see smaller teams focus initially on productivity, whereas teams that get larger, the challenges shift towards more scaling the team without sacrificing their quality or their performance. Macrina, I want to ask you, is this something you've noticed? Is this a trend that has been mentioned by your customers as you've seen them scale up? Have their priorities shifted over time?
Yeah, I think they're looking for a lot of reliability in the information that they're accessing in order to be able to make decisions. And these pain points, I think, we're experiencing some of them too. How do we make sure that we're maintaining our quality as we're scaling our teams? And I think that's probably why we've all moved, there's so much interest in AI, is because we want to become more efficient. Companies are trying to find ways to get their teams to be more productive while continuing to maintain quality. And AI is really interesting for that. So we're definitely seeing a lot of similar trends as well.
Nice. Yeah. I think it's an interesting topic, especially considering that it doesn't matter what size you are, you will actually be experiencing the same problems as bigger teams. It is just all about that prioritization of them and what is more crucial for you at the time.
Absolutely.
Another key takeaway we've got is actually directly related to one of these problems, which is 35% of our respondents say that maintaining quality while scaling the team is a challenge. And this has been a consistent theme throughout the years and across team sizes and industries. As we mentioned, normally once teams get a little bit bigger, this becomes the forefront of their problems they want to deal with. Martin, I wanted to ask you about this one. So scaling is a persistent challenge regardless of team size and industry. So what are some of the ways you've seen companies successfully handle scaling?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and definitely like an evergreen topic, regardless of the team. What I've noticed is that this becomes the number one topic once the basic issues have been resolved. So I'm guessing if you are so savvy that you are watching a webinar on this, then you probably aren't dealing with the very basic issues of like, are we even responding to customers? I've noticed it's kind of like a hierarchy of needs. As long as once the sort of super basic things have been covered around like volume and speed, then quality and like how good the answers are, regardless of the team size, that becomes like, top of mind. It's easier when you're small because it's just like numbers. If you have a couple of hundred support tickets, maybe you are a part of those conversations yourself, then you have like a very solid grasp on like what the quality is like. Where it becomes extremely complicated is enterprise. So if you have millions or tens of millions of conversations, thousands of agents, then even with a process, it means that you can cover maybe a few percentages of your total volume. So like like Klaus launched Auto QA, which analyzes the AI, analyzes 100% of your conversations in an unbiased way and gives you a score for it. And that was like a specific response to that. One of the sort of big daunting issues was that same thing that we already covered, that you have this anxiety of what I would call the fear of messing up, and the bigger the volume, the more you have agents, the more daunting it is. It's this, we're all customer support, let's say, professionals, and there's this feeling of it's almost like a battle situation. There's so much happening. There's always a queue, and the more cases you have, the more you worry about what is being said in those. So AI, I think, is it's an excellent problem to solve, actually, because you're dealing with volume that is not going to be feasible for any humans to resolve. So I would say it makes a lot of sense that this is very important, and it should be important for a lot of respondents.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to comment on this one here?
Yeah, fully agree, Martin, that being able to kind of assess your workload at scale, for want of a better way of describing it, and automate that and get a really true picture of what's happening, surfaces areas where you need to improve. But also, as teams scale as well, you've got to make sure you have very robust onboarding processes. You got to make sure that you think very carefully around how you bring people into the team, make sure that you're getting them up to speed. For example, particularly in small organizations, tribal knowledge tends to be a big thing. A lot of the information is in people's heads. And over time, you really got to get it out of people's heads and into some kind of knowledge base, or some area where other people in the team can access it and make use of it. And then over time, make sure that AI can make use of that knowledge as well. So that's, part of scaling is making sure that you get that knowledge management process or system in place, that you really avoid having to rely on tribal knowledge as much as you can, and that you are very thoughtful around how you bring people into the organization and make sure that experience is really positive for them, and they understand your bar for quality. They understand what's expected of them in the role.
Yeah, and Declan, I can't agree more. I think onboarding is such an important piece here. Most of the time when companies are scaling, they're scaling as a reaction to a growth in their customer base. And so it's really reactive. And as Martin mentioned, there's a lot of stress, right? When you have more people, you generally means you have more volume. And so being able to build that knowledge base early on and make sure that things information isn't living with people and there's a single point of failure is such an important piece to scaling. And it's not just the information that exists, it's also the onboarding and training, making sure that people have enough time to absorb processes, to absorb information, because once you get them in there, and I'm sure there's a bit of baptism by fire with smaller companies, but once you get them in the queue, it's really hard to pull them out to train again, and making sure that you're providing enough space for onboarding before you throw people in, I think is so important as companies are growing these teams.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that one. That's onboarding is key to scale for sure. Okay, we're going to quickly move now to the next key takeaway. So last year, we said that 2022 was the year of automation. And in a lot of ways, it was. How support teams are now relying more than ever on AI to improve productivity for teams without sacrificing CSAT or overworking their team members. But what we've found out again is that 2023 is also the year of automation and AI for customer service teams. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if we'll be sitting here saying the same thing again next year with where things are heading. 70% of organizations we surveyed are investing in more automation in the next 12 months. So that's not even taking on board the amount of companies that have done already. They will also looking to increase that. The thing is, this time it's a little bit different to last year, because of the advancements we've seen with OpenAI and GPT technologies. It's really kind of changed the game of automation. So we're likely to see this keep booming for years to come. So not only is the technology now better and be able to be used in different areas, it's also largely becoming more widely available to smaller teams as well. It used to be the case that only sort of the larger organizations with massive budgets could invest in automation and bots and AI, but now that's becoming less and less the case, and more companies are actually having access to these automation tools. Declan, I know that Intercom has been very deep in this space in the past 6 months to a year, even probably going back a bit further with your first bots that you introduced. What are your thoughts on especially this kind of new generation of technology that's come through?
On a personal level, I'm very excited. I've been involved in the support industry for probably 35 years now. And I think what's happening from a technology point of view is probably the most fundamental or transformational change that I've seen in that time. And again, I've seen quite a bit of change over that period. But when it comes to the automation, I think it's really the generative AI, the bot technology to engage with customers differently, and also engage with your support agents differently. So here in Intercom, we've introduced AI within what we call our inbox. So it's helping our agents drive productivity, for example, summarizing conversations, being able to change the tone of a conversation, etc. And then we've recently launched Finn, which is an AI, again, it's using customers help center to drive answers and resolve issues for customers. And as I say, the key difference that is around now is the ability of that technology to actually give a very good customer experience, because a lot of the automation is out there. It's still quite clunky, right? It's you're dealing with a robot, for want of a better way of describing it. The handoff between the robot and the human support side tends to be clunky. There isn't, or you don't feel that there's the same level of awareness of you as a customer, in terms of the context, and it doesn't feel very personal. And I think with GPT-4 in particular, there now is the opportunity to really drive a different experience. And I think that's what the real kind of transformation here is. Like, we definitely reach a point where you can use this technology in a very robust way within your operation to basically complement and augment your human support team. Like, this is not about replacing human support. This is about augmenting it, because there's many activities that our team do that they would prefer not to do. It's very routine, very basic, and automation can take that out. And it means that your team then are getting involved where there needs to be the high level of empathy that was mentioned earlier, or where there's kind of technical troubleshooting skills or awareness of the complexity of how a product or a service works. Like, that's something that is going to be difficult to replicate in AI. May happen over time, but it's not here today. And that's where I think we've got to think, quite differently around automation and AI. It's around complementing the human support experience and augmenting it as opposed to replacing it. And I think the technology has developed in such a way that we can actually make it quite a seamless experience for customers. Yeah, they may start the front end of a conversation dealing with a bot. They may switch to a human support agent partway through. Human support agent may switch it back to automation to maybe do some troubleshooting, etc. Like, we really got to stop thinking of it. It's a serial thing where you deal with a bot and you deal with a human. It's actually the two working together and delivering the best customer experience at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Really interesting point there about it not being kind of a separate function, but actually working together to make support better all round for customers and for your agents as well. Okay, we're going to take. Oh, sorry. Go on, Declan.
Can I just make one point? So one role that I've kind of hired in for in the last couple of months is what I call a conversation designer. So it's where you've got to really think quite clearly, what's the customer journey, as they migrate and change between a bot and a human and back again. And you really need to be very thoughtful around how you design that in, particularly at scale. And these type of new roles are also going to develop in support as well. That's the other exciting thing here. There are roles that never existed before are now going to exist because of this whole focus on automation.
I think it's also very easy to get caught in these hype cycles. Definitely, like one giant one right now, everybody's talking about AI and GPT, but ultimately, these are just tools to help you do the same things that you have always been doing. And like, what the whole is what matters, not having like one or the other novel tool or process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are now going to change things up. We're going to take a bit of time quickly to remind everyone that there is the Q&A section. We're going to get to that very shortly, so please do ask your questions. You can also upvote existing questions just by giving it a thumbs up. So if you see a question there that you want answered, make sure to give it the thumbs up, and that will let it get to the top of the list that we will look at answering at the end. So we're going to actually stop sharing the screen now, and we will jump into a little bit of a discussion with our panelists. And the question I've got for each of them is basically, what is the challenges you're looking to solve this year in 2023? So I'd like to open that one up and start with Declan to give us a go.
Thanks, Riley. I think the biggest challenge that I'm facing is really, I kind of mentioned earlier, really understanding the customer experience when we move into this very much AI world. I say we're very good at understanding the customer experience when someone deals with a human agent or a human support specialist. We're not so good at understanding the customer experience when there's a bot involved. And even like the whole QA philosophy, like, lots of organizations think about QAing the human support agent and how they've dealt with the customer. And I kind of want to pivot to say, no, I actually want to QA the customer experience. That's what I want to quality assure. It's not about quality assuring the bot or the human support agent. It's actually about quality assuring the customer experience. And I think that's a big pivot in the industry, and I don't think everyone's quite ready for that. Like, even trying to understand CSAT for an automated interaction is very, very difficult because, again, the customer tends to drop off the conversation. You don't always get feedback. It can be difficult to go back and get feedback from the customer. So we don't even have a robust way of understanding, well, was the customer experience positive or not? Just because it didn't come through and talk to a human, you can't assume it was a positive interaction. So there's all kind of challenges, in terms of that customer experience piece. That for me is the biggest piece as I look out towards this year, because the reality is automation is going to increase. The technology has matured quite a bit, and biggest challenge is how do we measure and understand the customer experience in that world.
Very good. Thank you, Declan. That's a very big challenge to look forward to this year. And yeah, the customer experience as a whole is actually a nice angle to be looking at rather than just the support experience itself. I think it's very important to make that distinction. Next up, I will pass this on to Macrina. What is your challenges this year that you're looking to tackle?
Yeah, not to copy Declan, but I think, we're all kind of have our eyes on the same thing. We're going to be making a lot of decisions, I think, when it comes to how we're using AI, how we're using automation. And it's really easy to get caught in the weeds with efficiency because that word is thrown around a lot for 2023. So how can we become more efficient internally but you don't want to lose sight of what that customer experience is either as you become more efficient. And so how do we marry those two things, and how do we make sure that the customer experience is really at the center of all those productivity decisions that we're making and the efficiency decisions? And I think one of the points that Declan made is another piece, an element of what we're talking about as well here is, there's a customer journey. So a lot of our customers, and I think most customers, might deal with people before they get to support. And those experiences are human experiences. AI is usually not involved in the sales process. Or we're not doing that yet here. So it's going to be interesting to see how customers shift, exactly like Declan said. How do you seamlessly get them from human interactions to a bot interaction and maybe back and forth in between those engagements? And how do you keep that not like it's a whiplash for the customer, or that you should feel like a really seamless communication mode between the two? And I think those are the things that we're all going to be juggling, is how do we marry AI? How do we make sure that it's not just supporting our business goals, that it's not helping our efficiency only, but also that our customers are getting value from it as well? And so that's really what I think we're probably all, to some degree, if not all entirely, going to be focused on this year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Macrina. And Martin, to you, finally, what is your big challenge that you're looking to tackle this year?
Yeah, but I just wanted to continue on what Macrina was saying, that it's extremely important to remember that the customer doesn't actually care or know what your org chart looks like or what your back office processes are like. So you can come up with all kinds of convoluted reasons for why some kind of handover didn't happen, or why it's so complicated to get in touch with you. The customer doesn't care. Why should they? So that's something that can easily get lost, especially as you grow and you add more complexity, and there are people with fancy titles and you're paying for a lot of expensive tools. So keeping in mind that the basic principles still apply. The customer still wants to get a fast and useful answer with a human touch, ideally in some cases. That may or may not get deflected by AI first, but those are some relatively timeless truths. And I really like that Declan was also pointing out the need for high quality humans and hiring anywhere. They might have different job descriptions and things that they do, but that's not going to go anywhere. As far as the challenges for this year go, then it's I'm now putting on my Klaus hat, and for us it's aligning AI with the changing needs of the market, because it is very extremely powerful. And Intercom was one of the first to roll out GPT enabled features. Klaus also did, but it's a extremely fast changing environment, and just making sure that we're all pointed in the right direction, and helping customers achieve that 100% coverage through auto QA. It's by far the number one challenge. And I think I have to compliment, I think Intercom was one of the fastest companies in the world to recognize this trend and launch Fin, is what it's called, right? That's cutting edge stuff from Intercom.
It absolutely is. Yeah, thank you very much, Martin, for that insight. So we're going to now actually go to the questions that we've received. So we're going to go just from the most upvoted questions and work our way down, time dependent whether or not we'll be able to cover them all, but we'll give it a go. First question is from Andre, and this is, do most companies usually measure CSAT in bot conversations, or is the CSAT measured only for human-handled requests? So do we actually ask CSAT after a bot interaction is the question there.
So I can give a view or perspective on it. Like in my experience, it's not that often that you're asked for your experience in terms of a bot interaction. Some companies do, some companies don't. I say it's not quite as straightforward as trying to determine CSAT for the human-handled requests. So I think it's an opportunity, i.e. how do we actually understand the customer satisfaction during that bot interaction. So yeah, I believe it's a gap. I don't believe companies have robustly found a way of handling it. But there will always be some outliers who actually do it well, but it's not, in my experience, not generally done well in the industry.
Very good, thank you. Next up is Kate. Kate's asking, how many quality specialists per 50 supporters or support agents are needed? In her situation, they teach newbies and then do quality checks by the same quality team. So roughly, what's this kind of ratio would we recommend? Quality specialists per agent?
I nominate you to answer. I have reason to believe created materials on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own experience from being a QA manager in a previous company, and we actually implemented a way that our team leads or our support managers would be doing the bulk of the conversation reviews for their team, as well as having some dedicated QA specialists as well to kind of bring in a less biased approach to grading as well. Because when managers are grading their own team, it does lead to its own kind of issues that can arise. So from my experience, I found per 50 supporters, I would say around 2, but that's purely anecdotal for me. So one QA specialist, a dedicated QA specialist for around 25 agents is probably doable, but it really does depend on volumes, on the complexity of your support interactions. If you're a very technical software that's, more of a developer's tool than a everyday man's tool, then those conversations are going to be way more complex, way more long, and will take your QA specialists a lot more time to review and grade. So obviously there are caveats to how many QA specialists you should have, and it really will come down to that. The best advice I can give is just get one, start with one, and they will soon tell you how much help they will need. But getting that first dedicated specialist in the team early on will have the biggest impact long term for you. Okay, we now move to Saskia. Saskia is asking, do you foresee customer service teams becoming AI QA teams in the future, or do you believe there will always be areas that only human agents can handle?
So I'm happy to kind of give a view on that. I believe there will always be areas where humans will be required. I don't think the robots will ever fully replace the humans, because at times there's empathy required, or there's some complexity around something that it's just impossible to build into the technology over time. Yeah, I expect support people will have to get involved in QAing or understanding the whole bot experience, and new skills and new roles will evolve there. But I think there's always going to be a role for humans. That's kind of my view.
Yeah, I agree with Declan. And I think, I don't know if it's a and or. We might have both. Humans might be answering questions that are more complicated or need to be contextualized or might be nuanced that bots can't ever do, or empathy. We keep talking about empathy. But also we might actually start having teams that are split up, where it's people who are taking really complex issues that bots can't handle, and then other people who are serving as QA for bots. And some of those things, it's hard to know and predict, but I think if the short answer is, I think there's always going to be a need for human support interaction.
I've been asked that question 1,000 times, and the best answer that we have internally come up with in our team is that there will be value in human support as long as one of those parties in the interaction is human. So maybe it's both. If it's bots serving bots, then not so much. But the human interaction in and of itself can be valuable for emotional reasons.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll move now to Kirill. Kirill is asking, do you think the capabilities of the big AIs, as ChatGPT as an example, will be able to adequately assess empathy in the communication process? And are there any plans for QA software companies to connect the API of ChatGPT to process these type of requests?
Yes. This is our answer. So, like, obviously, it's as I already mentioned as well. I feel like this is probably a close question. It's a pretty obvious use case for QA software, and Auto QA and Klaus GPT have, for the most part, already been launched. So, yeah, like, in regards to assessing empathy, then I've seen like what it can do, and it's surprisingly good. But the thing to keep in mind, and like for this use case of AI, is that it doesn't have to be spot on 100% of the time, because it's more like, Spotify's generated playlists, where if you get something good out of it, then you won already. Like, it doesn't have to be like 100%. And that's how our Klaus customers use the software as well. So it surfaces things from the mass of conversations, and if there's good stuff in there, that's good. If some of it is not perfect and spot on, that's no issue really.
Good. I skipped Eric's question, so I'll go back to Eric now. He is asking that we face the challenge that different teams prefer different platforms. So service, Zendesk, sales, Salesforce, for example. What is your take on centralizing CRM on one single platform versus finding the best in class for each use case?
Yeah.
So basically, the overall master tool.
I think this goes back to what we were talking about before, that, efficiency is great. Having one tool internally that everyone is using feels like it sounds like the right decision. But I think the other things to assess are, Zendesk is a lot more drag and drop. It's a lot easier to make changes and move more quickly. Whereas in Salesforce, it's a lot more customizable, but you might need more specialized teams. And while I think there's value in considering internal efficiencies, if it's at the benefit to the customer, then wonderful. But if the customer experience is going to be damaged or hampered in any way, then I think there's something to be considering if that's the right decision to make. There are really tight-knit, robust integrations between all of these tools. And I think efficiency of having every team work in the tool that is best for their needs is a way to be analyzing the value against having one tool. And we've gone through similar decisions at Aircall in the last year when it comes to the support offerings that we have for our customers. And I think just making sure that everyone is clear on what the objectives are. There are always ways to make sure that the customer and all internal teams have the access that they need, and the barrier to entry is not high for anyone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's about making sure you integrate the right systems and have access to whatever data you need. But ultimately, there are some very discrete roles or jobs that you're trying to support, and having the right software application or platform for each of those roles, I think, is ultimately much better than trying to drive a single platform.
Very good. Okay, I am aware of the time. We might have time for one more question. So we'll go to Shrey is asking, how do you define the scope of onboarding and support? When should the transition happen, and how do we define owners for onboarding and support? So basically asking how do you define like how much how much is onboarding and how much is actually training on the job once you've kind of got your toes in the water a bit more. And when is the best time to transition from onboarding to work? Who would like to answer this one?
I can certainly give a perspective of it. A lot depends on the complexity of the support environment. You know, if it's really, really complex and you have to have very strong base knowledge before you can actually do the work, then your kind of onboarding where you're in training only is probably slightly longer. If it's an environment where maybe you don't need quite as much technical knowledge and you can actually throw people into the kind of deep end more quickly, then you'd probably transition people more quickly to deal with customers. So I think it is, you know, almost on a case-by-case basis. But my own view is that as far as possible, get your support agents as early as possible in the life cycle when they have sufficient knowledge and expertise that they can add value. Because it's in dealing with customers that you really kind of understand, you know, the role. You know, it's all theory up to that. Dealing with customers, it's where the rubber hits the road. It's where you really understand the challenges of whatever this product or service that you're supporting is, and you really will kind of hone your knowledge. But you have to take account there's probably a base level of knowledge front, and that will vary from one company to another.
Yeah, we have quite a robust onboarding program now, and we have over 100 integrations at Aircall. And so all of our frontline teams have to have some level of knowledge, right? And so sometimes what we're training them on is not necessarily the information, but what to do when you don't know the information and how to find it. And I don't think that it's a black and white state. I think there's also this like gray area in between onboarding and pushing people in to start answering live questions. So making sure that there's a good, you know, someone feels comfortable enough. There's always going to be a level of anticipation when someone's, you know, transitioning into support, but there are levels of making sure that, okay, they've, you know, first we start out with, you know, some mock tickets, and then we're going to give some live tickets, but on really specific issues, or we're only going to give them a particular channel to work on for a period of time. I think that there can be like a slow transition over, and that's going to vary depending on what your agents need to know and what your company's offering. So it's hard to answer it definitively, but I think just making sure that, you know, you don't want your team to feel overwhelmed or anxious when they're doing their job. The customer is going to feel that. So if that means keeping them off live support or extending the onboarding period for 3 more weeks, it might be of value in the long run. And I think those are some of the decisions that, you know, you make as you start thinking about what do I consider someone who is ready to handle support on their own.
One thing that I remember that worked quite well when I was head of customer support was giving new joiners live tickets, but somebody more senior simply checked the answer before setting out. So, you know, when we're dealing with emails.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to have to wrap it up there. I do apologize if we weren't able to answer your question. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much to our guests, Martin, Declan, and Macrina. We will be sending an email shortly following this, probably in the next day or so, with the recording of the webinar as well. Do download the benchmark report if you haven't looked at it yet. We only scratched the surface of what is involved in that. So please do, and keep an eye out for later in the year for the next survey for the 2024 report. Thank you very much for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Riley.
Riley.